Hey everybody, welcome back. This is XL 10-minute leaders, where in 10 minutes we share insights, wisdom, journeys from people, different parts of the world. It may be technology, it may be business, it may be society. We're heading to London today to bring on our next guest, welcoming in Jamie Brownlee. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Lovely to speak to you.
It's great for you to be here because we've been communicating all today, talking to different people as we do on this podcast. We talk to different people. We talk about our journeys. We talk about our business. That's the communications business. That's your business, isn't it? Communications PR. How would you
It
describe
is.
yourself? What's on your business card, Jamie?
My business card reads Director Green Target. So I am essentially, yes, I am in corporate PR. So and my predominantly looking at financial services companies. But I have, in my experience, done PR across the board, not just in financial services. So I'm very fortunate to have had that kind of quite wide base of different clients. But predominantly, I look at the sort of the earned media side, editorial PR, if you want to call it.
What do you spend most of your day doing as a corporate PR person?
It will be a mixture. I mean, again, I'm sure you hear this in every walk of life, but every day is very, very different for us. One day can be about having a brand. It could be a small brand, medium-sized brand, a big brand you're trying to promote in certain segments of the market. And you are essentially trying to come up with interesting news hooks, interesting media points, things that you know that journalists are writing about. And that can be come from just talking to journalists. It can be writing, pitching. The others on another day, it could be that actually you've got a client that's in a lot of trouble. There's a terrible piece of news about them. There is a real problem with the company structure. There's a problem with performance of the company. And you are essentially firefighting. So you're relying on your contacts within the media. You're relying on your relationship with your client to make sure that that you're sending out the right message. So it can be very different, different forms of emotion for sure every single day.
Great. And what makes you really good at this? What's your superpower as a corporate PR person? Well, how do you succeed in this role? What kind of
I think
qualities?
you've got to be really thick-skinned to do what we do, and I mean that because with our job, unlike some other jobs, we actually have pressure from two different sides. Where essentially on a day-to-day basis. So you've got clients who are desperate to have their brand in really top quality outlets, whether it be in papers and magazines, online, on podcasts, on social media, on TV, on radio. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily relate to the size of the company. So the challenge is often that we've got to try and almost not dampen expectations, but manage expectations of what we can do. And then the other side is from journalists. So journalists who we often don't get a great name, I think, from some journalists, and that's probably because there are some poor PRs out there that don't necessarily do us justice. But the pressure from them to get the stories. And to be able to work with us to make sure what they're reporting about our clients is accurate and interesting to their readers. So you've got to be thick-skinned. You've got to be willing. You've also got to be one of the areas I think a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to PR is you've got to be a salesman. You've got to be able to sell a story. You've got to be able to convince a journalist that they should be writing about this story, and hence they should be writing about your client as the solution to the issue or the challenge or the topic that you have raised.
How do you then manage expectations around that? If I'm a client coming to you and I say, okay, Jamie, work your magic, get me into the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal. It's like, what can you do for me? How do you, because obviously that may or may not happen, but the point being is that unless you buy placement, you can't actually guarantee anything, can you, to a
You,
client? How do you manage that?
you're absolutely spot on, and the amount of times that you've listed the publications that we get asked about on a hourly basis from a range of clients, and it's important. It is so important to manage expectations and to try and explain that what does that client have to offer? Do they have data? Do they have interesting spokespeople? Do they have thought leadership? Do they have data or info about their company, about growth milestones, things that we can use? If they have that, there is an opportunity, there's a chance. At the same time, we are always going to say, look, ultimately, we would love to get you here, but we also understand that there are core media that we absolutely know, and we're fairly confident we can certainly generate coverage in those. So it's about managing expectations by almost providing a tier-based system of the type of outlets that they can get in. But sometimes you have clients who will literally say, look, and it often comes, I would say, from people who, it's often, very much often actually, from people who are not in marketing themselves. So it could be a CEO, it could be a CFO, it could be an analyst, anyone who says, look, I've got this really interesting thought. I want the FT to cover it. And then we have to say, and it can be quite difficult sometimes because these people have put a lot of effort into this piece of content. They've been thinking about it and they think it's brilliant. And I think what you've got to do is you have to be honest with them about it from the start. If you try and say this is brilliant and the FT are going to love this, or BBC, Sky News, Reuters, Bloomberg, they're going to feature you, this is fantastic. It's not going to help anybody. And I think you're going to end up them spending more time on that piece of content. And ultimately what's going to happen is down the line, when they have another piece of content, they're not going to necessarily know if they should trust what you're going to say. And I think if you're honest from the start and say, this is great, but you need to tweak it this to make this really, really of interest. Or you can say, look, actually, this isn't quite right for the likes of the FT of Wall Street Journal. But I tell you what, this will work really, really well for this trade. And I tell you why this will work well for this trade. And I tell you why being in this trade is actually just as beneficial to your potential clients or your prospective clients.
Exactly. Okay. What's changed? The 18 months that we've experienced in the last, before this madness happened in the world with COVID, and it still isn't finished. How's it impacted your industry in terms of how you do your work, in terms of what's working? Are some things more effective now than they were? Some things less effective in PR? So tell us about the last 18 months.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of 2 points. I think the first point is if you look at it from an agency perspective, so those working in the PR industry, from an agency perspective, I think if you were an agency like us that fortunately had a system in place before the pandemic where people could operate remotely, we could offer 2 days a week working from home before the pandemic. The actual transition was incredibly seamless. We were all amazed by the resilience of how well we just carried on, and to the point where we're having arguably one of our best ever years coming up as well, just because of being there and being so resilient to what's happened. And I think some firms who perhaps were more traditional in the ways and didn't like working from home and didn't want that in place, and I think they have certainly suffered and will suffer. And I don't think that's only going to be seen in the short term. I think long term, if they maintain this idea of not working remotely, not being flexible, not allowing this, a more dynamic work-life balance, I think that they will struggle to recruit the quality people that they need going forward. I think from a media perspective, one thing that's changed is how incredibly important the relationships you have with journalists are, because journalists now are very rarely picking up phones because they are absolutely inundated on their mobiles by PRs, often with stories that aren't relevant, aren't right. So they're relying on getting emails or having the number of the person, the PR that they have dealt with in the past and they know are reliable. So from our perspective, that's great because we do have those relationships. And I think once journalists start to maybe go back into the newsrooms, then it might become, they might become more accessible. But I think what it's done is cemented relationships that you have worked on for many years. And they now have a trustworthy base of PRs that they will rely upon, come back to again and again, because they know that even if they're working in their kitchen, they know that they're going to get a story and that story is going to work above the others. They don't need to look at the other ones because they know that story that they're getting is top quality and the client is credible and one that they should be reporting about. So, and then on the other side as well, and this is perhaps something that's maybe a bit longer than the last 18 months, but maybe in the last few years, shorter, sharper, more dynamic content. It's completely changed from being an industry where you would place a 1,500 word article with a publication, they would run it and that would be done. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's fast, it's shorter, it's got to be reactive to market things that happen in the market, and it's got to be incredibly quick because journalists are under so much pressure to write things, and they need comments and they need them quickly. So you've got to be part of the dialogue as quickly and accessibly as you can, basically.
Are you seeing also that clients are now exploring different formats? Are they also looking at, for example, podcasts, or are they looking at new communication channels? What's kind of interesting for clients now to explore?
Certainly, absolutely. It's all sorts of all the ones you mentioned there, podcasts, social media. I think there's still a massive place for example, for print media. We've been talking, for decades, print media would die. It's obviously dwindled, but it certainly hasn't lost its credibility. Being in the Sunday Times, being in the FT Weekend, being in the Telegraph, being in, you name it, these publications, that's where you want to be ultimately. But to the same extent, now it's understanding that there are different forms. Podcasts in particular are being watched by a new generation of listeners. And I think particularly in financial services, if you want to target the next generation, so if you are a wealth manager or a trading firm and you want to target a new swathe of a generation of young millennials or younger, podcasts are fantastic for that in terms of that form. But also we've seen a massive rise in the use of LinkedIn, LinkedIn and Twitter. LinkedIn particularly in its use for marketing to B2B marketing, I would say. And then while Twitter has been a fantastic tool actually for journalists to use. So a lot of clients are trying to use that as a way to target journalists as well as traditional media, traditional email, should I say? And Twitter is a great form of communicating with journalists to generate interest.
Fantastic. It's Jamie Brownlee. Before you go, Jamie, give us some details of where we can find out more about you and your work.
Sure. Yeah. Our website is Green Target. So it's www.greentarget, that's one word, .co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm also on Twitter @BROWJD. Always keen to hear from anybody. If anybody has any questions or would like to get in touch, very, very happy to help.
Fantastic. Love it. Jamie Brownlee, everybody, all the way from London, Green Target, in the world of PR, hanging in there, growing, thriving. The craziest 18 months that we've ever known. Thanks so much for coming and sharing your story with us today and a little bit about your world and your craft. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you.